Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. One of the things that I found fascinating about Zimbabweans is how gullible we are, the electorate. I'd like to play you a video of Nelson Chamisa boasting about how he helped to the West to make sure they imposed the sanctions on Zimbabwe. Just listen to this.
ndakabvamo ndapinda mudenmark ndabvamo ndapinda muuk ndabvamo ndapinda mugermany ndichisunga one sunga dozen.
There we are, Benjamin. Sunga one, Sunga dozen. What do you think?
Good day to our viewers. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for having me on the program. Yeah, I mean, we have had so many claims over the past few years, ever since I think Nelson Chamisa took over the reins from Tangirai or became popular. Such claims, I think, for example, here, I think he is taking credit for something that I don't think he deserves, because I mean the sanctions, as we know, were imposed because of gross human violations. So for him to now go about and take ownership of them, I think it's another lie. For me, that's my take on it.
Well, let's be honest here. The West, as much as they may have consulted the opposition, do not need Zimbabwe's opposition to decide their foreign policy, particularly a corrupt and incompetent opposition. It is absolutely naive to really seriously think the Americans, the Germans, Europe, the rest of the Western countries base their foreign policy on what Nelson Chamisa, Tendai Biti, and others in the opposition told them. That is naive, to say the least. What I find interesting here is that this is at the heart of the recently passed patriotic bill that is basically saying that any Zimbabwean who talks with the West in any way criticizing the regime is committing a serious crime. Yes, no one has been arrested and imprisoned as yet, but it is nonetheless a serious threat that everybody now has got to be well aware of. But this is the kind of stupidity, in my view, that has led to this. Because even ZANU-PF itself, their claim that sanctions were imposed by the West because some of the Zimbabweans called for them is, to say the least, naive. Because it's ridiculous. The West definitely would not base their foreign policy on the comments or the requests of an inept and incompetent opposition. This is what is so ridiculous about it. So both sides now are claiming that they have the ears of the West and the other one is saying, oh, it is the West that it is the opposition that caused the imposition of the sanctions. But the other interesting aspect also, which I think should be covered here, is that during the GNU, both Morgan Tsvangirai and his colleagues actually called for the lifting of the sanctions. And the West ignored him. You remember that, Benjamin?
Yes, I was just about to touch on the point, and thank you for bringing it up. I think this just shows how somebody that is taking claim on something that they don't have merit for is just sickening. I think it's low for Chamisa to go and say we brought about the sanctions, and it's also foolish of ZANU-PF to say that MDC were the ones that brought the sanctions. I think it's a wrong story that is being sold, and I think they're in it together. We've had so many claims from both the ruling party and the opposition, saying taking claim for or blaming for Zimbabwe's wars on other people. Yet it is them. The opposition is. I personally now think that they're incompetent. Given the recent interview I was listening on Eddie Cross, and I think it is sickening if Zimbabweans cannot see in between the lines. Then I mean we are in trouble. Definitely, I do not see us getting ourselves out of this hole, because these guys are lying to us. And the worst part is we are believing and taking dear to heart what these guys are selling, which is sad, because it's all nonsense.
Well, I totally agree with you there. The interesting thing is, I don't know whether people managed to listen to the audience, Chamisa's audience, in that video. They cheered when he said that he is the one, Sunga dozen, who went around and told these people, impose sanctions, and they all agreed with him and imposed the sanctions on Zimbabwe. His supporters cheered, meaning that they believe that he was able to do so. But by the same token, ZANU-PF has been telling its supporters, and not only its supporters, SADC countries have since, for the last 2 years at least, accepted that sanctions are a serious problem in Zimbabwe. They've been calling for their lifting, and they've even had the 25th of October designated as Anti-Sanctions Day. So Mugabe, for his part, Mnangagwa and Mugabe actually before him, for their part, they've managed to convince their supporters plus the regional leaders that sanctions are a problem, and they've been blaming the sanctions on the West for imposing them, but also blaming the opposition for inviting them. And how easily both parties seem to accept that as a reality. I think that is one of the tragedies here.
Yes. Let's look at Zimbabwe in totality, right? Zimbabwe is divided between two. Is divided into two when it comes to the political environment. It's either you're ZANU-PF or you are the opposition, particularly Chamisa. So you find when ZANU-PF is doing their rallies, there's a lot of clapping of hands. When, for example, to say, Mnangagwa 2030, people clap hands and, ululate to show their approval. And when Chamisa comes up and he stands and says, I've been and I've seen Trump and we talked about a lot of money and for example, just this one, let's not go far. This one here to say, I'm the one that is tightening the screws. And people stand up and laugh, and clap hands, show acknowledgement and approve such 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 claims. This just shows you the whole picture of Zimbabwe. Where both sides were being sold a lie. And we are very much rejoicing in things that are not even validated. So for me, that just shows the level, of how gullible we are and how naive we are. Unless the only way, I've always said this, the only way we can turn the tables around is by starting to think for ourselves. I think we have to stop, just going with the flow and not using our own, minds. This is what separates us from animals, the ability to think. And if we cannot do that, we're in trouble. And hence, Zimbabwe is where it is. Not because of the opposition, not because of government, because of its people.
Yeah, well, I've got to agree with you there. I think it was Albert Einstein who famously said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think I'll go one step further in saying, well, for a genius like him, yes, he can see that we are doing the same thing and expecting over and over again and expecting a different result. But for the ordinary person, sometimes it is very hard to see that repetition to start with, and that we are going nowhere. I was speaking this afternoon actually with some Zimbabweans, and they're adamant that Zimbabwe is making progress, and they are ardent Chamisa supporters. And when I asked them whether or not they accept that Chamisa made a mistake last year, he promised that Triple C was going to win big, and in the end, it did not. They would not accept that Chamisa lost the elections. As far as they were concerned, it is work in progress. In other words, forget the fact that the elections were rigged. Let's move on. The next step. And you can see 2028 is going to be a repeat of the same thing. So for the last 43 years, we have had rigged elections. And some people fail to see that we are repeating the same thing over and over again, and we're not making any progress. But they see it as progress. It is tragic, absolutely tragic. Somebody once gave me an example of insanity at Ingucheni. I don't know whether you've heard about it. There's a mental hospital in Bulawayo called Ingucheni. And one of the tests that they check with some of their patients there is somebody watering the garden with a leaking bucket. And one is going to say, okay, if the bucket is leaking so much that by the time they get to where the flowers or the vegetables are, all the water is leaked out, maybe that is when you can say, well, that somebody is insane there. But what about if half the water in the bucket is leaked out? If somebody continues watering the garden with the bucket that is leaking so much, such that half of it is leaking out, is that insanity? Where do you draw the line? And that is really the problem here. Somebody thinks that they're making progress, even after 43 years of rigged elections. They still expect, well, if next year the elections are free, fair, and credible, then, we were making progress. 43 years. What about if the elections are rigged again? You're going to give yourself another 5 years. It's absolutely unbelievable. And I think that is the trap we are caught in. We always want to see the positive side of it. And we are caught up in this trap where, we don't give a serious analysis of the reality now to change it, because we think we have learned some lessons and let's move on. Tomorrow will be better. And I think that is the tragedy here, Benjamin.
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, progress is measured. We have to measure progress. And for example, we look into Mnangagwa's tenure. His first thing was by 2030 we would be having some sort of vision of prosperity for everybody. I mean, we are over half his term now. Let's measure it. Are we going towards achieving that vision 2030? I don't think so. All right. We go to the opposition. The opposition promised us that this time around we are going to win. We are not going to get beaten twice because we are not foolish. And they got beaten twice, which means they are foolish. Right? Now, let's measure the progress. What progress has been made? Absolutely nothing. Why? I mean, right now, the opposition is in a mess worse than what it was from the very beginning. So if we were to do the measurement, this means that we have gone backward. Right? Somebody will defend and say, he did not mean that he was going to win, straightforward. He was meant to expose. He never was meant to expose. He never said anything about exposing. It was him who said he would win. Right? So if you are to do the measuring and not to do the defending, this is where our problem is as Zimbabweans. We are not using our own brains to think. We are not analyzing. We are not scrutinizing. We are just simply so desperate. We are just taking what we are being told and running with it. And hence we are stuck. And you are right to say 2028 is not very far. We are going to do the same mistake. I think it's just another calm before the storm. Chamisa is quiet for now while he's trying to bring up this whole thing as we are getting closer. It's become madness. It's become madness and sad. And sometimes, I think if our inability to think for ourselves is what is causing Zimbabwe to suffer right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think some of it is also a question of accepting that we are not in a position to think for ourselves. We are not thinking at all. And I think that is probably a tougher problem, a tougher challenge, to realize that you're not thinking in a rational way. What you think you're doing is, you believe it is rational, and that's why it is so difficult. Like I said, if we're going to measure insanity as somebody watering vegetables with a leaking bucket, how much of it has got to leak before we say that is insanity? So if you think, oh no, yeah, it's only a few 2% that is lacking, that is not insanity. 40%, that is not insanity. So you can go on and on in this particular case after 43 years of rigged elections. Of course, it is insanity because these measures to make sure that elections are free, fair, and credible could and should have been attained in 1980. And when Mugabe shortchanged us on that one, we should have made a stand and say, no, that is totally unacceptable. This is the reason why we had the fight for independence, to have a meaningful say in the governance of the country. That was at the heart of the fight for independence. And yet, we failed to do so. And to have waited all these years and still allow it to continue, it's absolutely insanity. But we have got people who seem to think that we are making progress. What progress did we make? No progress here. And yet some people will still maintain that we are making progress. We are going in the right direction. I think this is what is so insane about it. And the insanity sometimes is very difficult for those who are in the midst of it all to realize that what is going wrong, that something is going wrong and that should be changed. And in this particular case, it doesn't help when the political system itself does not allow you to think for yourself. They're always being stampeded into decisions which do not make any sense at all. Thanks very much, Benjamin. I don't know whether you want to make your closing remarks there.
Thank you. So in closing, I would say, we are in this situation together, but I'm sure we can help each other. How do we help each other? By, empowering ourselves, making ourselves knowledgeable, thinking outside the box, not just following instructions from the top. I mean, we have been here with MDC, the opposition. We've been with them for now 24 years, and with ZANU-PF, we've been with them for now 44 years. And let's ask ourselves, let's measure from independence. How far have we gone ahead? Is there anything to show? No. What are we being promised? Is it valuable? Right? Is this where we want to be? These are some of the questions that we're supposed to be asking ourselves, and not clapping hands. This is what differentiates us from animals, the ability to think for ourselves. And if we cannot do that, then we are not human beings. We are now subjecting ourselves to being animals, right? We have to think, and democracy needs, right? It's one of the fundamental requirements. Democracy needs a knowledgeable electorate, which is you and me, that asks questions, that thinks for themselves, that validates some of these things that we are being promised. But if we cannot do that, I don't see us coming out of this position. They will sell us lies, they will sell us short, and we will gladly clap and accept. I think this is the most disappointing thing. I urge, all our listeners, let's think about it. Really, let's stop and think about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin, and to the listeners, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and good night.